Hello everybody, I'm the Baking Queen and this is my kitchen. Today we're going to do an old southern favorite, the Hummingbird Cake. It is springtime and Easter is right around the corner, and this is the perfect time for this cake to come out and make an appearance. Now, I'm going to give you a little history though about this cake because it didn't start in the American South. It actually started in Jamaica in the late 1960s. Originally it was called the Dr. Bird Cake, a nickname for a Jamaican variety of hummingbird called the red-billed streamer-tail. The name came from the way the bird's long beak probes flowers like a doctor inspecting a patient. What does that have to do with the pineapple and banana cake? Some say the cake was named after the bird because it was sweet enough to attract hummingbirds who only eat nectar, while others say the yellow streaks of banana were reminiscent of the bird's plumage. Either way, we now have what's called the Hummingbird Cake. Back in 1968, the Jamaican Tourist Board decided to try attracting tourists by sending out press kits to the US. In the packets were a few recipes from the island, including one for the Dr. Bird Cake. Over the next few years, similar recipes started to crop up in local papers and community cookbooks across the South under various different names, including the cake that doesn't last. Eventually, a recipe for the Hummingbird Cake did pop up in Southern Living magazine by Mrs. L. H. Wiggin in the February 1978 issue. Since then, this cake has become a Southern tradition and has made its way across the country as well to a few other states and homes. So today, I'm going to show you my recipe for the Hummingbird Cake. So let's gather our ingredients. You're going to need some pecans, all-purpose flour, baking soda, ground cinnamon, allspice, salt, mashed bananas, crushed pineapple, eggs, oil, and of course you know I use extra virgin olive oil, brown sugar, granulated sugar, pure vanilla extract. Now there is something I want to say about the pecans. I had whole pecans in my pantry, so you're going to want to chop up your pecans and toast them, and trust me, you're going to want to toast your pecans. It makes a big difference in the flavor in this cake. So once you gather all your ingredients, let's get to baking. So I have my handy dandy KitchenAid mixer all set up with my whisk attachment and my bowl. We're going to go ahead and dump in all of our wet first. So we're going to do 2 cups of mashed bananas. You're going to do 1 8-ounce can of crushed pineapple. The whole thing, juice and everything. Next, you're going to put in 2/3 cups of oil. I like to use extra virgin olive oil just because it gives your cake and any dessert you're doing a little bit more flavor. It usually makes it more rich. So I would spring for the extra virgin olive oil just to add that little bit of flavor. Next, you're going to add 2 teaspoons vanilla extract. Now I'm going to go ahead and give this a little bit of a mix. I like to give my wet ingredients all kind of a mix so they're all incorporated together really, really well before I add my dry. Now I'm going to add my dry ingredients. So I'm going to start with 3 cups of all-purpose flour. Add 1 teaspoon of baking soda. Then it's 1.5 teaspoons of ground cinnamon. One-half teaspoon of ground allspice. A 1/2 teaspoon of salt. 1 cup of brown sugar. 3/4 of a cup of granulated sugar. And then 3 large eggs. So now we are going to beat this all together so we get a nice smooth cake batter. It's going to take it a few minutes, and don't forget to scrape the sides of your bowl. Make sure you scrape the sides of your bowl really good. It's a chunky batter, and it should get everything out the bottom of the bowl, but just to be safe, you want to get a spatula, a spoon, whatever you have, and just scrape the bottom of the bowl. And then give it a mix for a few more minutes. Alright, so batter is nice and mixed and incorporated, and now we're going to add those toasted pecans into our cake mix. And give it one last stir, just incorporate everything. Alright, it looks like everything is in there really, really good. So I'm going to remove my whisk. I have a cake pan, it's already greased and waiting for me, ready to go. I'm going to take my batter and I'm just going to dump it right in the cake pan. Just like so. So the batter looked like it was a little much for the one pan, so I went ahead and divided it into two. So this is going to bake at 350 degrees for about 60 minutes. You might want to check your bake time, so if you want to start a little lower than that, depending on where you are, it may take less time, it may take more, you never know. So I would start these probably good 30 to 40 minutes and then check them, because you can always add, you can never take away. So we're going to put these in the oven and I'll see you guys in a little bit. So here's the cakes, they are out of the oven. They did take about 55 minutes to bake in my oven at the 350 degrees. So this cake, it's going to be dense. It's going to be a very dense cake, but they look amazing. They smell really good. So I'm going to flip these out onto my paper plate. I'm going to put them in the freezer overnight, and I will see you guys tomorrow for decoration. Alright guys, so it's the next day. I had my cakes in the freezer overnight, so they were quite frozen this morning. I did let them sit out and thaw out just a little bit, and then I'm going to cut them. I'm just going to cut them in half so I get like 4 layers in my cake. I like a cake to have, quite a few layers. It looks really nice presentation wise. It also gives you a nice tall cake. Usually your cake will have like that little dome, and if you want to, you can cut that, and that'll give you a completely flat cake. To start with. I'm not going to do that because it's just going to be for us and our family, so I'm not really worried about that. But I am going to cut it, so you're going to need your cake, of course. I have a turntable here that's going to help me out. You want to get a really good bread knife. It's a serrated knife. It's going to help you cutting your cake so you can get through the cake portion without tearing it up and getting too many crumbs. That's also why I like to freeze it. Sometimes I just throw it in the refrigerator to make sure it's cooled down. It makes it a little bit more solid and easier to cut through. So let's get started. Find your middle. It is moving around a little bit. Sometimes I pull it up like this after I kind of mark it and just kind of give it a saw through. Make sure you turn it and you're following your line, keeping your knife as straight as possible. I do have a bigger knife, a bigger bread knife, but I think I left it at work. So this is going to have to do today. I can feel it almost all the way through the middle. It's still pretty frozen. So there we go. And there we go. So I'm going to do this again for my other layer. You can see all the lovely pieces in there, the nuts, the bananas, all that good stuff. So yeah, so I'm gonna put this on a plate. I'm gonna put some parchment paper in between. Probably throw it back in the freezer because I like it frozen when I ice it. And then I'll come back and we'll start doing the icing. So here's the cake, it's all cut. As you can see, I got my layers and then my parchment in between. This way, like when I put it in the freezer or the fridge, it does keep them separated and easier to deal with later when I start to ice it. So let's get to making the icing. So now we're ready to make our icing. I like to make a whipped icing, so I got the heavy whipping cream, and then you're going to need some sugar to give it that little sweet. You can use a sugar substitute if you want to. I like to use the powdered sugar just because it incorporates a lot easier and better into the whipping cream. And then I'm going to do a caramel flavor, so I got some caramel sauce like you would use on ice cream to add to the whipped cream. So let's get started. So we got our bowl set up once again with our whisk attachment. Now when you're making whipped icing, you want to put your bowl inside of the freezer or the refrigerator to get it nice and cold. I did not do that, I completely forgot, but that's okay, it's still going to whip up really, really nice. So I'm going to use my entire container of heavy whipping cream because I want to make sure I have enough for my cake in between all the different layers. So this is a 1 quart container of heavy whipping cream, and I'm going to go ahead and bring it up and kind of get it going, because next I'm going to put in about a cup of my powdered sugar. And you're going to want to whip this on super high to make sure you whip up and get like the air in it and everything. So once I get it whipped up a little bit like this, I am adding in the caramel sauce. And this is basically to taste. So I'm going to let this keep whipping until it forms my whipped cream. Alright, so it looks like I got a nice stiff peak of icing. It's got a slight color to it because I added the caramel. So we are ready to ice our cake. Alright, so we have all of our ingredients here ready to go. Our icing is made, our cake is cut. I'm going to use the same cake board I used earlier when cutting, so it looks dirty and messy, but that's okay because we're just going to use the same thing. We're going to cover it with the cake. So we're going to put our first layer down. And then I'm going to get me some icing. To put in between the layer. Now you want to make sure when you're icing and you're filling your layers, you want to come all the way to the edge and maybe a little over. So later, when you ice the outside of your cake, you don't have a gap. Sometimes you end up with like a little gap of icing. And this will help you prevent that from happening. I mean, you can always go in and fill it in, which a lot of people do, and you know, it's just as easy, but this will just kind of help you later. I'm gonna take the next layer. Now I always put my cut side up just because it's cut and it's gonna help me more with the top once I get everything together. I go to ice the outside of the cake, so you get like that nice flat hat box look. Now remember, this cake I did put back in the freezer, so right now it is frozen. And the reason why I do that is it's just one, it's a lot easier to handle your cakes when you're icing them. It also locks in moisture, so your cake stays nice and moist. I usually don't use like a simple syrup. A lot of times places will use that just because they have left the cake sit out for an extended period of time, either working on decoration or setup, or maybe you're in a cake shop and you just have a lot going on. So you use a simple syrup to kind of help keep and give your cake moisture so you don't end up with a dry cake. Well, I have found that if you just put it in the freezer, pretty much right after you make it, it locks in a lot of that moisture, natural moisture. It even adds a little bit to it. Okay, so we have one more layer. Put on top. And now we can just scoop a bunch. This is how I like to ice mine. Of course, everybody has their own techniques. I like to put a bunch on the top and then bring it down. I don't have any of my spatulas with me, otherwise I would be using that, but if you have a butter knife, works just fine to help you get your icing nice and evenly around the sides of your cake. This is also the time you want to take to fill in any of those gaps that may have formed with the icing. You want to be pretty hefty with the amount of icing you put on, so when we go and we kind of give it a comb, you don't end up seeing the cake part show through. That's kind of the idea. You don't want to see it come through the cake. I know there's a lot of times wedding cakes, you'll see the ones where they looks like they kind of scraped the cake with the icing. So you definitely see the layers. And I mean, it's a nice look, but I don't know. I like my cake to be covered. And it also helps keeping that moisture of the cake. So again, you don't have a dry piece of cake. So now I'm taking my scraper here, and this is the fun part because you're trying to scrape down your icing, make it as smooth as you can. Of course, I'm just gonna go over it with a comb, so I mean that part probably doesn't matter quite that much. Depends on what you want to do with your decoration later. And this just takes practice. Like this part just really takes practice. And eventually you'll kind of get the feeling of your icing and your cake shapes, whether you're doing a round or a square or a hexagon or whatever you're doing, to where you end up with a cake that kind of looks like a hat box. Alright, and like I said, I'm going to use my comb. This is my comb tool I have. Oh, I just touched the side, but that's okay. We're gonna comb it, so it's not a big deal. And I'm just going to run this around. So there it is. There's my box, my hat box, if you will. I combed the side, so it gives a little bit of texture. I'm going to take the same sauce. And I'm just going to give it a little drizzle. So I'm going to put this in the refrigerator and let this set up because I have one more thing I want to add to this. Alright, so like I said, I'm going to do one final thing to my cake, and I have these candied pecans that I made. They're very, very easy. Maybe I'll do a small video at some point to show you how to do those. But I'm just going to take some, and I'm going to put them around the base of my cake. And just push them in. So they're going to be like my border. You can see some are not quite so secure, but that's okay. These ones are going to more kind of place on there. So there we go. Alright guys, well here it is, our hummingbird cake. It turned out amazing. We cut into it already. It's delicious. It retained its moisture. Like the flavors were just, it was amazing. I mean, you've got to give this recipe a try. So traditionally this cake is usually served in a bundt pan form or like a square kind of coffee cake form, because it is a dense cake, and then usually there's some sort of glaze or something put over it. Just because it's a super dense cake. It's not like your traditional sponge cake where it's kind of more light and airy. So just kind of keep that in mind if you decide to give this a try if you've never had hummingbird cake before. Those of you who've kind of grown up with this cake know what I'm talking about, but you know, maybe this inspired you to try something different. You know, you can make it into a layer cake. You can serve it up, you know, however you want. This turned out really, really good. I'm glad I added the candied pecans. That was like the icing on this cake. So I'm kind of glad I did that in the end. Don't ever be afraid to try something, add something. You never know. You may come up with the next best thing, right? But as always, thank you so much for following along. I hope that I've inspired you to get into your own kitchen and try something new or revisit an old favorite. And as always, I am the Baking Queen. I hope I've inspired you to just keep baking. I'll see you guys later.